Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to today's Design Timber webinar brought to you from Timber Development UK. In a minute, I'm going to hand over to Will Gowland and Harry Kay from Builtworks and Architects Holiday, who will be presenting today's webinar on the Drying Shed Sauna, beautiful little small project. But just before we start, I'm going to say a few words about Timber Development UK. We were formed in 2021 from the merger of the Timber Trade Federation and TRADA. This makes us now the largest, most comprehensive supply chain body in the UK. We span from sawmill to specifier and everyone in between. Essentially, if you work with wood, you belong with us. Our three missions can be seen here on this slide. We want to connect the supply chain, lead best practice, and accelerate a low carbon future. And we do this through a number of outputs, such as this webinar today and the Design Timber webinar series, along with plenty of other webinars and CPD that are all available on the TDUK YouTube site. So I do urge you all to go and have a look and explore around that. But we also have things like Designing Timber, our members magazine. We also have Supplying Timber, its sister title, which also covers all the essential timber stories, inspirational case studies and CPD, but from a supply point of view. There you can see Designing Timber. We also have outputs in our knowledge library. You can see one there, which is about moisture management during construction. All sorts of other hot and interesting timber topics can be found on our knowledge hub, so do explore that on our website. You can also see there one of our knowledge sheets from our knowledge library. That one's on using structural insulated panels, but we have these on anything and everything, whether it's from a design point of view, a supply point of view, a construction point of view. Our knowledge sheets cover all the nuts and bolts and ins and outs of everything timber. You can also see there one of our many case studies. We have well over 100 case studies on our site. That one is on Cotto House, which was the subject of another one of our webinars earlier this year, and you can rewatch that webinar on our YouTube channel, and you can download and read all of our case studies, lots of inspiring timber buildings and the stories behind them on our website. Here's our hot off the press new issue of Designing Timber magazine. All members get that posted out to them, but you can also browse it on our site. On the cover there, you can see Rafter Walk, an extraordinary timber project in Canada Water in London. But it's packed full of lots of interesting timber stories, the work stack building, CPD and guidance on regulations. So that's hot off the press and very new. Do go and browse it. So this webinar is only possible thanks to all of our wonderful members. We do encourage you to join if you're not a member already. We do, as I've said, TDUK unites the entire supply chain. There's all sorts of valuable resources that are member only. We do offer a lot of free to access to all case studies and other resources. But if you really want to make the most of your work and get your work shown to your peers, we do encourage you to join us. There are lots of member-only perks, such as Find Your Timber Partner, which offers you essentially your own shop window to your peers and to anybody else that visits our site looking for a timber specialist. So do explore our site and find out about all the member-only perks that membership can offer. So now I'm going to hand over to the creators of the Drying Shed Sauna. And I do hope you'll enjoy the webinar and do make the most of the Q&A button, which you can see towards the bottom of the screen. Answer any questions that you feel like asking, and we'll endeavour to answer them as we go along, and there'll be time right at the end for a live Q&A. Thank you very much. Enjoy the webinar. Over to you, Harry.
Great. I'll just share my screen. Is that working, Matt?
Yeah, looks good to me.
Yeah, so I'm Harry of Builtworks, and with my partner and fellow director, Will.
Oh,
We founded BuiltWorks in 2020, and I'm just going to give a few slides on the background of the practice, because the saunas kind of feels very much a continuation of the ethos and the reasons why we're friends and why we founded BuiltWorks and what we wanted to do with BuiltWorks. And then later, we'll talk a bit more about our kind of sister company, as it were, Architects Holiday, which is an operator and a developer of kind of leisure experiences, with cabins and things like the sauna that we're kind of building on a couple of sites around the country. So Will and I met as undergraduates, as part ones at University of Nottingham. We've always had this shared interest in building and making things. We've been away together a couple of times to build on workshops, and this was the Koshirikora landscape workshop that was part of the AA visiting school that we did a long time ago, I think in 2012, summer 2012.
yeah.
Where we built a couple of projects together, and actually that summer kind of rolled into a few things I'll go into in a moment. As part of our kind of university work, we were both together, but like maybe slightly independently. We always wanted to one-to-one prototype our projects, and we always had an element of building parts of our proposals and testing ideas and making sure they worked, and kind of learning through making and doing. And this was kind of came to a head as we founded a small festival called Datum, which was kind of a build in the woods, where we would have like a week-long series of workshops and pavilion construction and kind of experimental construction techniques. And then as we got to the weekend, we'd invite a load of people down and have a bit of a party to celebrate and use those structures. And this was all quite formative for us, I think probably the first serious one was 2012, and then we did it for a few years after that.
Yeah.
Then post part two, we kind of both went off into not architecture. We both worked for a practice called United Visual Artists, and we designed things from stage sets such as this at the Palais Garnier Paris Opera, to stage sets for the Armory in New York, at Glastonbury for Massive Attack, and art installations and exhibitions. So we kind of spread out a bit, and then we kind of after that came back together to work on a few film projects. And really, before BuiltWorks, we set up a studio called Animated Works, and we worked on a few film projects for a few clients, including the AA or UCL, Tortoise Media. And we're very interested in just experimental techniques in motion graphics and film and filming and photography. And we were kind of going the way of a creative studio, but in the end, we kind of like building, and we like designing buildings, and we like putting buildings together, and we like exploring materials and material use in construction and just making things. And so we kind of, after a long time in the making, we founded BuiltWorks in about 2020. And so our kind of relationship of building together started in probably 2010, something like that. So 10 years of building together, we kind of came up with these 5 themes that defined our work and where we wanted our work to go as architects, which was sustainability, which is obviously sustainability in construction, in material selection, but also that a building in its design is sustainable. So not to do anything for the sake of doing it. There's got to be a just reason for things being the way they are. Health, in that a building needs to promote a healthy environment, both internally for its users and occupants, but also externally for those who have to live nearby anything that we build. And that is very heavily related to context, and that could be an urban context, societal, community, rural, landscape. Context has got to be taken into account and inform the building, but also be looked after by the building. And technology, not to integrate technology, but to use technology in the design development of any proposal that we're working on, and that technology changes and is flexible, and that leads on to functionality. And functionality is this kind of idea that the function of a building might change and be adapted. And so along with technology, those 2 things are adaptive, and adaptive functionality is to be designed into a building in that its use or its program might alter, but the building has to last and be used. And so that's what we founded BuiltWorks on. Should I pass to you? Well, you're talking for.
Yeah. So this is a practice picture from a few years back now, but I guess BuiltWorks formed properly at the tail end of COVID, sort of the end of 2020, after having worked informally together for a number of years, doing kind of small kind of projects and competitions here and there. I guess coming out the back of COVID, everyone had become very kind of comfortable with working remotely, and so this idea of us working in two geographically quite different locations actually worked out kind of okay, because Harry had relocated back to Kendal in the Lake District, and I was living down in the south in London. So we've always had this very kind of geographically separated practice setup, with the studio up in Kendal, and then the London office, where actually the majority of our work was being done and undertaken, but with all the kind of the studio set up mainly in Kendal. If you can jump to the next slide. So we really love to design through making. Making's always been a big part of what we do, and a lot of the kind of really, I guess, successful and formative projects that we've done are actually ones that we've done ourselves, and to a large part built ourselves as well. So we wanted to make sure that through running the practice, that was really kind of heavily baked into everything that we did. So we set up this idea of having an annual summer build workshop. So every summer we would go down to the woods where the sauna is. You can see in the image on the right hand side, sauna in the background, and we would build a new structure every year. Now this is generally off the back of kind of ideas that we've been developing with other projects for commercial clients throughout the years and throughout that year, and just kind of wanted to test stuff ourselves. So the sauna was really the first major summer build project that we did, which we initially naively thought we'd probably do in a few days. A few days turned into several weeks and months as the scale and ambition of the sauna exponentially grew. I mean, all the better for it, but it was, certainly not something that we ended up building in a few days. But if you flip to the next slide. In the studio in Kendal, we have a large kind of studio set up for making. So we've got a ceramics area, and we've got kind of woodworking facilities and a laser cutter and stuff like that. So we're able to really test and prototype a lot of products and things ourselves, materials, whether it's tiles, or Harry's at the moment making some windows and doors for one of our cabins up in the office. So there's always a lot more than actually drawing going on in the office, which is always nice and exciting. Next slide. I also teach down in Hook Park for the AA's Design and Make Masters program. We obviously specialize in experimental timber construction. So some of you might be familiar with this field station project, which was in the Timber Awards from a couple of years back. This was a project that I worked on with Design and Make students, with the team down there, Manuel and Kate. It was kind of a continuation of the exploration of small diameter roundwood timber, all from the site of Hook Park itself. And we were looking at, if you jump to the next slide, Harry, the use of timber in a timber space frame setup. So we developed this kind of large space frame supported by these small tree forks as a location for remote field work. If anybody has been to Hook, you'll know that it's quite a large site, 300 acres, and the campus is centrally located within that. And obviously the students, whilst they're in this amazing forest, don't often go out and work out in the forest because it's so far back to the campus. So this project was about trying to create a space in the woods that you could go out and have a bit of a base out in the woods, and not have to trek it back to the studio or the workshop every time you need to go and get something, so you could leave tools and things down there. And also for the foresters, and there's a footpath nearby as well, so for locals to stop in at as well. Okay, next. So I thought we'd just show you a couple of other formative projects that we've done before we get to the sauna. So shortly after we set practice up, we joined a team to design part of the Venice Biennale, the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2020. The project was called the Garden of Privatized Delights, curated by Madeleine Kessler and Manege Vigesi. And within the pavilion, we designed a room which explored the use of facial recognition technology. We designed the installation to focus on the kind of the technology and its use in public space and its kind of apparent control of public space. So as you enter the room, visitors were basically scanned by a camera running facial recognition technology, which would basically collect a series of data points, assumptions on you based on your photographic image, and then it would assign a series of avatar characteristics that we had developed. And as you walked around the room, there were other cameras in the room that would then recognize you and then play back this avatar of you, this interpretation of you. As is often the case, we ended up designing and building the installation ourselves back home, partly because of COVID. It was going to be built in, or the LED screens and stuff were going to be built in China, but we couldn't do that because COVID shut everything down. And then we couldn't get the contractors out in Venice to build the frames. So we ended up building the LED screens ourselves, which included, I can't remember how many, it was nearly 50,000 LEDs or something bonkers.
Sore fingers at the end.
Building LED screens, and then obviously the timber frame for the rear projection screen as well. But we'd also built a one-to-one mock-up in the studio as well, just to make sure that the installation worked before it went out. So yeah, we've always enjoyed kind of really designing through the making and making things ourselves, and not just relying on others. So I guess when we think about design, even from kind of the early conceptual stages, it's very much through a practical lens, a practical understanding of how things are actually going to be made, and we produce these kind of very detailed fabrication drawings. Designing in Rhino as we would be building it in real life. So everything is designed to scale and to the exact material specification, so we know exactly how things are going to become into reality. Okay, next slide. Okay, you can jump in, Harry.
Yeah, I'll quickly go through this project, which was kind of because we're going to talk about the sauna in a moment. This project kind of came out of the sauna in terms of the sauna was a useful project for us to, as a practice, to really explore woodworking and joinery and how joins should go together. And we worked on this chocolate shop in Covent Garden in London, which was to be a large, just single piece of joinery. And we wanted to kind of echo the arts and crafts kind of style that was around when chocolate making took off in the UK. And the nice thing about such a project and such a period was the simplicity of materials and the kind of just this idea of craft. So this chocolate shop was for a new brand of chocolate called Barnaby, and they wanted a new flagship store in Covent Garden, and they hand make basically takes on favorite chocolate bars that are around on just supermarket shelves, but kind of make them into a crafted best version of themselves. And that had to kind of come into all aspects of this shop. So the joinery is European oak, and we kind of, as with the sauna we'll talk about later, we kind of focused on a single profile of material. Sauna was 25 by 50. For the chocolate shop, we focused on a 70 by 70 profile of this oak and a single type of join, which was this Tuscan tenon join, which you see in very early joinery in like barn roofs and rafter construction, but then also later in arts and crafts furniture. So it's a very simplistic wood on wood way of joining the shop front together. And then we also worked with Morris Studio on the design of a bespoke tiled floor, which we were fortunate enough to have such a client that allowed us experimentation to the degree that we could just do hundreds of samples. There were many samples that we produced here in our Kendall workshop in collaboration with Common Objects Studio. And we kind of arrived at this design with Morris Studio that kind of efficiently utilized 14 different tile types, I think, with 6 different glazes for the mosaic floor. And we were fortunate enough as well on this project to work with K&D Joinery out in Barking, who are just amazing at what they do, and they've got so much experience in woodwork, but also shop fronts and practical ways of building. And they kind of really like our idea for the joinery, and we were able to go through a very rigorous sampling process with them as well, and also fabricate full assembly in their workshops. And they have, although access to a lot of skill and knowledge in terms of traditional joinery, they've also got the most up-to-date, high-spec kind of joinery machines and CNC beds that allowed us to prototype. And it was kind of a great combination of that traditional craft, traditional knowledge, lots of work by hand, but also the process kind of sped up by using technology and our drawings and our 3D kind of designs that we'd produced, and then their knowledge of joinery, and then also their capabilities to produce and sample and test things quite quickly and build things at 1-to-1 in their studio. I'll quickly go through this project for the AA, which was kind of, again, a lot of wood involved, although they're massive. I'm assuming most people who will know the AA and the AA buildings. Are these 7 Georgian terrace houses, and there's a lot of conservation to be done in those spaces. So we were initially brought on to kind of have a look at the campus and reduce energy usage across the campus and ways of distributing particularly heating and water, and heating and cooling as well, and how that's distributed across such a warren of a building, to reduce overall energy use, and then how energy is kind of distributed through these grade 1 buildings and at the center of in the center of Bloomsbury that are very highly protected by Camden. And the kind of the lecture hall space became a prime area of part of this project, which was kind of unloved, hadn't really been touched since the 90s, and it was kind of not really well equipped for new technology. It had really poor lighting, it was often cluttered, and it take a long time for staff to change this space, which is kind of, on any given day, it's a seminar room, it's a corridor. More people actually use this room as a corridor than they do a lecture hall on any day. It can become a lecture space, then it can have an evening event or a party. So it's kind of this very flexible space, this very beautiful space in a very prominent grade 1 listed building at the center of Camden. So we kind of we wanted to strip everything out and get rid of the clutter and basically make the Georgian architecture the focus, whilst also providing a whole load of tech. It's kind of the first project we've worked on the only project I've worked on where there's a construction budget and 2/3 of that is the tech that's going into it. So there's just a lot that's in there hidden away in terms of lighting, AV distribution, data, cameras, and obviously presentation kind of equipment, and then also the flexibility for it to be used as a seminar lecture room. And our proposal was for discrete pieces of joinery to be inserted into the space that would house like the heating and the AV and all that tech, and then also these acoustic rafts, which would dramatically improve the acoustic quality of the space for lectures, seminars and tutorials, but would also provide more places to house projectors and speakers and microphone arrays. So it's very highly integrated, and also very heavy. So there was a lot of conservation to be done on the existing structures of the AA, the timber structure, the floor spans, and these prime beams that kind of hung, the secondary joist hung from, had to be reinforced with steel plates, below which we'd add some new structure and some new AV installations that would support that timber. So the idea was to be stripped back, be made of high quality materials. This is ash timber used in the construction of the joinery, but also hiding away a lot of the AV installation, whilst kind of structuring the building, whilst it looked like we didn't really do much. So this project took about 2 years to complete, with a lot of phasing and planning around the school program, long time to get listed building consent for the works, and then just a long time in using the correct materials, lime, looking after the timber, lots of things you didn't expect when it was opened up. but overall a successful project. And then finally, the sauna.
So the sauna. So maybe I'll just head off a couple of questions as well that have come through, just in terms of where the projects for these summer workshops have been undertaking. So the site for the sauna is the same location as the cabins, which we'll talk about later, which is part of the Architects Holiday Company, which is our sister company to Builtworks. So it's actually on my parents' farm. So I was lucky enough to grow up on a farm and kind of grew up in an environment where just going out and building and making things was sort of a daily and weekly kind of activity, whether it was generally helping around the farm or just kind of playing about building tree houses and that kind of thing. So having grown up with that sort of mentality, I guess it is where our playing continued as architects, building these sorts of things. We have since purchased part of the farm from my parents now, so it's now within our ownership. So we're now operating there independently. So we're hoping to, I guess, grow and do more of these workshops on the site as well, which will be fun. In terms of the permissions, somebody was asking about how we get permission for these live build workshops and things. We got planning for, full planning for the cabins on the site. So we had to go through a fairly painful 2-year process of getting planning for new build cabins in an AONB in a really beautiful part of East Sussex. So yeah, it was not easy, but that's kind of how we're operating. Obviously, some of the smaller kind of non-permanent construction, we've done ad hoc, but the sauna is currently sitting on the site of one of the cabins as well. Okay, next slide, Harry. So this is the site. This is before the sauna was built. The sauna is actually sitting just down to the left. So really beautiful, mature, ancient English woodland, lots of bluebells in the spring. It's absolutely idyllic. Next slide. And we'd always had this idea of building a sauna as one of the first projects we did as a live build. It was partly due to, an enjoyment of saunaing ourselves, and also to provide an additional amenity for the cabin guests as well, partly to improve winter bookings. So it's just a nice winter activity that might encourage people to book and stay in our cabins on the site. So you can see some sketches on the left of our interpretation of the references on the right, which were these drying shed buildings, which are or have been prevalent in Europe and the UK, often used for drying grain. You get similar, slightly less detailed kind of facades like this in timber drying as well, timber seasoning and stuff like that. The bottom right image is a traditional agricultural grain store. So it's propped up on little stone stilts which keep the vermin out, and that was our kind of logic for propping the sauna up as well as the fact that we were building the sauna. If you go to the next slide, Harry. Adjacent to a small stream, which it doesn't really flood, but it can kind of spill over the bank slightly. So having it off the ground and not on traditional foundations made sense here. Also, within the planning application, we were limited to only building with screw piles on the site. So we hid a series of metal screw piles underneath the center of the sauna, which I'll show you in a later slide. But giving the illusion that it's just propped up on the 4 corners with the rocks. Okay, next slide, Harry. So as I said earlier, we tend to, with these sort of scale projects, we tend to design everything in minute detail in Rhino first. So everything from the battens to the cladding to the floor deck to the wall cassettes, everything is dimensioned and drawn exactly as the materials will be installed on site. This, to a certain extent, also so that we could get material quantities, takeoffs. Another question was around funding, like how we fund these. I mean, this was done very much on a shoestring and funded internally, so through Builtworks and obviously the labour of our own staff. And so it's a reasonable, or considerable personal cost to the practice to do this, even though it's relatively
The
small
material
sums.
cost was quite low for
but
such a building, but yeah, the labor and time is
the time cost of taking what was going to be a 3-day summer build workshop, which turned into a week-long endeavor, or weeks-long endeavor, I should say, of having our various members of staff down there and being paid to be building this rather than doing fee-earning work is tricky on the practice finances. Okay, next slide. And we also build scale models as well to test these these designs out before we actually make them for real. So this was a model that Harry made up in a Kendall studio with the laser cutter. Maybe a good point to talk about the red that was chosen here. Red was used, obviously, I mean, it's a sauna, so there's the obvious reference to the heat of the fire, but also because red is a very relaxing color associated with the setting sun, that kind of warm light you get in the evening. It's a very relaxing color, and really has a kind of quite profound impact on the human body, associated with kind of sleep and the end of the day. So contrary to popular opinion, red is actually a very relaxing color, not a scary, frightening, enlivening color. And if anybody is watching this based in London, this model is also currently in the RA summer exhibition, so you can go and have a look at that. Next slide. So here's some images of the actual build itself. So we built it, or we started building it in September 2022, obviously with the great intention and ambition to be building it kind of in situ and on site in the woods at Great Park Farm in East Sussex, but obviously the great British weather did not provide, and it absolutely poured with rain, so we ended up building it in one of the polytunnel greenhouses on the site instead, so we were out of the rain a little bit, or a lot. So a slightly less picturesque location, which is why a lot of these photos aren't so nice and green and woody, and actually just us in a greenhouse. You can see Harry doing some painting there of all the prefab pieces, and then testing out on the bottom left this little plugged detail to hide the screw fixings of the battens on the external cladding. You can see on the top left, we prefabbed all of the pieces for the space frame for the roof in the tunnel before taking them down into the woods and then installing them on site, so we weren't chopping everything on site. Okay. And we did a dry assembly as well. So that central image, you can see we did a dry assembly of the wall cassettes. We didn't put the roof on, but we did do the floor and the wall cassettes inside before then transporting it down into the woods on the tractor, which was fairly interesting, trying to get that actually down onto the site. Okay, next slide. So these are now some first images of the site itself. You can see that already in the bottom right image, September has already turned to, I think, November by now, where by the time we'd got back, might be later than that actually. And we'd salvaged the rocks from the site. So there used to be an old oast house on the site, which was demolished back in the early 1900s. So we recycled some of the stone that was left over from that for the 4 corner foundation stones. You can see the floor joists going in there, and we then hid the screw piles, the metal screw piles I was talking about earlier, in the center of the plan, so you can't really see them from the outside, but if you peer underneath, you would be able to see them. And we so the first time, the top right image, is the first time we'd attempted any scribing, which was fun. So we scribed the 4 timber corner posts onto the rocks as well, which was really nice. Quite a nice, fun activity. Okay, next. And some shots of the cladding going on. So we used larch cladding for the externals. It was more economical to buy them as long strips. So we bought them in, I can't remember how long they were now, 3 or 4 meters long, and then cut them down to length with the chop saw. if we were doing this again, I think we would probably go for a slightly larger format shingle, because nail gunning, I don't even remember how many there were now, thousands of small format timber larch shingles was, yeah,
very neatly,
very neatly and architecturally, it was challenging. And that job seemed to go on for weeks. Maybe a nice time to also talk about the battens. So the main kind of structural material, the structural material for the roof was the standard 25 by 50 roofing battens, kind of prevalent absolutely everywhere, and also really cheap, crucially for us. Lots of stuff that we've done in the past has often been built out of roofing battens because it's one of the cheapest things to build out of. But we made this grid, this kind of sandwiching on the corners, these two roofing battens together, but then in the center, these 4 roofing battens together to create these very strong composite kind of posts, essentially, which are then fixed back to the timber frame. So then the roof could then be supported off that, so it's on a slight angle to make sure that the rain would obviously come off. Can you just go to the next slide, Harry? Okay, we'll be on the next one, but I'll talk about this quickly first. Yeah, go on.
Which one? Sorry.
Go to the next
Alder.
one. That's it. Yeah, we'll talk about the alder cladding. So internally, we opted for alder timber cladding, because the trees around the sauna are all actually alder. So we wanted to have a bit of a nod to the standard trees that the sauna was sitting in. They historically like to sit in slightly wet conditions. Unfortunately, we weren't able to process any of the alder that we had on site, so we had to buy that in from a company called Finmark, who provided this very thermally stable sauna cladding panels, tongue and groove panels, which they don't get super hot to touch when they are heated up, unlike other hardwoods. So even when the sauna's been running at sort of 90 degrees for several hours, it's still, you can lean against it and touch it, and you're not going to get burnt. So it's the reason alder is quite a popular choice of material. It's quite soft for interior cladding. Okay, next slide. Shall I pass over to you for this bit?
Yeah. So yeah, you'll appreciate that November's now turned into, looks like May or June on the build, and we'd identified just up, if you look at the image on the left is the bank that the sauna sits on. The sauna's to the right of the, just out of the frame of this photo, and this was a silver birch that came down in Storm Arwen, I think it was, and we identified it as a piece of wood that we'd really like to use for a project, and for the sauna we thought it would make a great bench and also a post for the outside shower to be connected to. So the first job was to extract the silver birch from the bank using the tractor and the chainsaw, and then cutting with the grain with kind of a bit of a homebrew DIY sawmill come chainsaw with a plank stuck to the top of it. We spent about 6 hours. I can't remember well how long. Maybe not 6 hours, but it took a large part of a day to saw this bench lengthways with the grain to create the.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a particularly powerful chainsaw. Not really intended for this kind of use. So it was pretty torturous.
It was not a straightforward job, and there's Will enjoying it at the end of that day, which was really hard work. And then, such as the spirit of the project, we set about processing the silver birch where it had fallen, where we'd cut it. We planed it down. We wanted to make these concealed brackets so that when it was in the sauna, it felt like it was kind of just unsupported, almost like a tree that had fallen over in the woods where there was no obvious structure keeping it up. And then we kind of routed in the grooves, which are important because in a sauna, if you have, the reason why things are slatted in a sauna is obviously to allow movement during heating and cooling, but also if you have large flat surfaces, especially on this bench, which is quite a heavy piece of wood, you can burn by not allowing some kind of airflow. So we routed in the grooves into the planed surface of the the bench. Again, it's very off grid, and there wasn't really mains power down there, so using kind of battery operated tools to process quite a chunky piece of timber was a labor of love. And so again, the original plan for this project was to be built in a week, but this bench itself probably took that long to
Probably took about a week.
yeah, extract from the woods and get it over to the sauna and do
Yeah,
all
even
this
just
kind of
moving it like in the tractor from where it fell, even when it was cut in half
yeah,
to the sauna was quite an
yeah.
endeavour.
Yeah, because you see in this bottom right picture, the silver birch came from up over in the distance, but just getting it from there to here, about 50 meters, yeah, a bit of a job. No, yeah, and that's just kind of the processing of the wood from sawn to plane to routed for a bench. And here's just a couple of other elements that we formed the project. Was a traditional Navi wood burner with some high quality sauna stones was part of the installation, and this agricultural corrugated underline roofing for the roof. And then we used recycled sheets wool, actual food packaging from like meal kits and things like that for parts of the insulation where we could. And that photo is the insulated door. And then kind of the final aspect that kind of came together was a showering platform, again formed from the same silver birch as the bench, and a cold plunge just next to the sauna, just along the bank of the stream. Do you want to wrap up, Will?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the main thing to finish on is just our sort of desire to want to design and build things ourselves. So the sauna was really the first time to this level of quality that we had really built absolutely every element of the build, from the timber frame to the cladding to the windows and doors and roofing and the bench and the flooring, absolutely everything. And since then, with the cabins that I'll go on to talk about, which we're now building, it's kind of really given us confidence as designers. The more we understand about actually how things are made and put together, particularly with timber framing and the use of timber construction, it's been really, really helpful and really helped to kind of feed back into the design process.
I think as well on that point as well, it's been helpful in terms of like communication as a practice, especially when we were doing this build, we had younger members of staff who were maybe not experienced in construction and drafting, and that having actually put something together and understand the materials and the processes, I think like as a group it helped with quickly understanding and discussing technical details of the project, having built something together.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on, I'm going to answer, actually, so you can leave it on the slide, a couple of other questions that have come in. So how's the bench looking now? So we intentionally installed it with the bark on because we wanted it to feel very much like that experience you have as a child when you go for a walk in the woods and you find a fallen down tree and you kind of climb along it and sit on it and that kind of thing. So wanted it to feel very natural and as if it was something that was this sort of like found object in the space. And we quite like the idea of it just gradually the bark gradually coming off over time, and it not being this perfect thing all the time. Like nothing is ever perfect, and this idea of trying to keep it perfect was just always going to be impossible. So we kind of really embraced it. I mean, most of the bark has now come off, so the image in the center does look a little bit different because it's much darker now. It's kind of really darkened down over time.
It's been oiled a few times. It's obviously been well used, and it's splitting a bit, but where you would expect it to split, just along the length in the central portion. It looks I mean, it looks pretty fresh and nice there, but it looks great now. It's like a weathered piece of, you got a pattern. It's like a worn dining table or something. It's got a lot of character.
Yeah, but a specific question: have we had any fungal attacks or anything like that, or rot setting in? But no, not at all. I mean, it fell down, and I think it was only a matter of weeks before it was chopped up. So it wasn't like it was lying on the ground. And also, where it fell, the limb that we used was still kind of in the air. It wasn't laying flat on the ground, so it never actually sat on the ground at all. So yeah, no, it's been absolutely fine. in terms of design time, another question was how long did it take to design the sauna? It's a hard one to say because it's an idea that we'd had for a long time, and so over numerous probably months and possibly even years, we'd kind of been thinking and talking and occasionally sketching and circling back to diagrams and
I
sketches
think
and
it's
notebooks and stuff. So
a lot of it. A lot of it came from the cabins which I think we're going to talk you through in a moment. But the cabin process, like given this site, like getting planning there, getting funding, like securing that project has taken years and years. And I think the sauna's got a lot of the elements that you'll see on the cabins, and kind of like maybe a slight frustration that was taking so long to realize. So we put a lot of those ideas into the sauna.
Could I just mention, we had a couple of questions about the ventilation and drainage, and I was thinking exactly the same thing. So I was just wondering, because we've got quite a few questions there, but I was wondering if you could just say a few things about that.
Yeah, of course. So in terms of ventilation, we have wall vents at the bottom and at the top of these. I don't think you can probably see it in any of those images, but
there was a photo we've not included that showed it really clear. It's not in there.
Yeah, but in saunas, it's really important to have good ventilation, particularly with wood burning stoves. So yeah, there's good air circulation in there. In terms of draining, there's not a floor drain as such, but you can see we've got these slatted duckboard panels which we installed with a rubber membrane on the floor, so water can fall through the stones, the sauna stones, the rocks in the stove, sorry, and then if they find their way onto the floor, it just kind of sits on the floor. We found that typically the water actually just evaporates, like it's so hot in there. It never really sits wet. I mean, it might be wet for maybe 20 minutes, half an hour after somebody's used it, but it will dry out pretty quick. So yeah,
it's a good question, because it was a plan to put a floor drain in, but we discovered we don't need, like it doesn't even when we clean it and although the cleaners clean it and it just dries out so quick. Yeah.
I was also going to say, I don't know if this is definitely true, but was Caber floor chipboard used, which is like a sort of P5 designation? Is that and that's on the actual floor, isn't it? So that in itself, so that in itself is a water resilient board.
It is, yeah. But then we went, full belts and braces and stuck a rubber membrane with an upstand around the edges as well on top, just to make sure that no water was going to get into any of the timber frame beneath it. I can see we're probably going to miss some of these other questions, but I can see there's also another question about the roof and is it open at the eaves. So it was actually originally designed to have the structure exposed internally, but obviously then we got into the detail of actually how do we insulate that, and do we then just fake it and drop like another fictional sort of space frame internally so you can still see it, but it's not actually structure anymore. In the end, we decided to omit the internal structure and it's just visible externally. So there is an insulated roof in the ceiling, and then the gap in that image on the left, the gap between is open, but obviously you can't see up into that from inside the sauna because it's got an insulated roof in the kind of solid top layer of shingles that you see there. But it was elevated. Actually, it's another good thing to talk about, which we're not spoken about yet. It was elevated mainly to provide a space, give a space back to wildlife. Create hopefully a bit of a habitat that birds and insects can then re-inhabit. It also allowed an element of lightness to the structure by lifting the roof up. It made the whole, because it's quite a tall, small building, it made it feel much lighter to kind of lift that roof up and overhang it. Just see if there are any other quick questions.
Sorry, I don't think I can see the questions.
There are hundreds of questions actually.
Well, one of the questions was to ask about whether the shingles were treated with preservative, but I also wanted to ask, because I thought it was great you mentioned this earlier, that there is a slight angle to the roof from a rain, because when I was looking at it, I was thinking it looked very flat, but so it's good to hear there's an angle to the roof. But I was also noticed that there's a slight angle to all the shingles as well. So that which looks to be the case. So that's another kind of rainwater measure. But so the larch shingles are they treated at all, or?
They were treated with the wood stain that we put on there. Now we always get asked about the wood stain, and unfortunately at the time we hadn't had enough time to do the level of research that we have now done for the cabin. So it was a fairly standard red stain from a builder's merchant that we used. But the intention would be, if we did this again and on our cabins, is to use either kind of like a linseed paint or a pine tar to achieve this. But yeah, it's preserved with a wood stain. I mean, larch on its own doesn't really need to be treated, so it will last for a very long time untreated anyway.
I thought it's not a question, but I thought it would be worth just drawing some attention to the sort of nice protruding sort of dowels that you have, which is a bit of nice touch.
There's a couple. So there's the dowels, and then there's also the wooden block pegs. So the wooden blocks that you see sticking out, so in front on in the elevation, are all structural. So the top 3 layers are all structural because they're actually the things that are tying the roof space frame together. So the ones that are coming at you in the screen are tying through all of the vertical roofing battens, roofing batten posts. And then the dowels, which you can probably, so in the right-hand image there, just to the left of the door, you can see there's these little dowels at each of the bottom of each row of shingles. They are there hiding the screws which were fixed, face fixed back to the structure. But they also, both the blocks and the dowels created really nice hanging spots. So when people come down to use the sauna, you can obviously hang dressing gowns or jumpers and coats and trousers and all that kind of stuff, bags on the pegs. So they kind of double up as both a structural and kind of aesthetic device as well as a practical one.
It's quite, in terms of just the work of the practice as well, there's quite a seamless progression from this join that Will was talking about, like the structure of the space frame passing through. Was quite a seamless progression from that to the chocolate shop project that we showed earlier, where it was like it's kind of the same thinking just spilled over into another project in the development of the joinery there.
Yeah.
See, somebody's asked whether the internal alder cladding was treated.
Yes, it was. It's oiled. Actually, I'll let you on a little secret here. Is actually the photo that you're seeing in the center was a photo taken before it was oiled. So it has actually gone a little bit darker, but you can get special oils that are meant for saunas. They are, I guess they can deal with the temperature fluctuations and the high level of heat. But that came from Finnmark as well. Yeah.
That covers all of the questions I think that have been asked. Oh, we did have a question about the screw piles. I think, what was that? That was...
Oh, what type and how were they installed? They were relatively small screw piles.
They were kind of
exactly
ones
how
that
big
you
they
could,
were.
I think they were eight. I think they were 850s.
850. Okay, yes, something like that.
From a company called the Ground Screw Centre.
And
they're ones that you can install.
Yeah, you get like a big bar, and it's like a corkscrew. You stick the bar through the top, and you just wind it in yourself. So yeah, it's wound in. There's 5 of them in like a sort of 5 dice layout in the center.
And they're more like lateral restraint and wind kind of lifting kind of structural reasons, where the uplift from the wind, whereas the stones in the corners are taking the load.
Yeah.
That might literally another question just popped up. What resists rotation structurally?
I mean, the screw piles to a certain extent, and the piles do, because they are they're in a 5 dice plan, so they're stopping any kind of like twisting. The walls are also, if we're talking about the above ground structure itself, are sheathed with ply on the outside, so they're stopping any kind of shear movement as well. Kind of really stiffen the whole thing up.
And the floor has that OSB diaphragm as well that was mentioned earlier.
And also that space frame grid, that is absolutely rock solid. There's I mean, it's not really stopping the rotation, but between the ply mainly, I guess, stop the twist. Is it worth? We've got 5 minutes. Is it worth just spinning through the the cabins which are on the same site?
Yes, yes, please do. Yeah.
It's also worth noting that the sauna is now publicly open, so you can, if you fancy, you can head to the Architects Holiday website and book to use the sauna yourself.
So on the same site as the sauna, we are currently building the 5 cabins that we got planning for. They are built in the woods along the stream, as you can see in the plan on the left. It used to be an old derelict piggery.
This is the sauna.
Yeah. If you go to the next slide, Harry. So the first one is Yogi's cabin. All of the cabins are themed around different experiences. And yeah, this one is based on a pond and has got a yoga studio in the center of the plan. For all the cabins are aimed at couples, generally urban young professionals, sometimes for solo retreats as well, but generally couples. And this is Explorer's Cabin. The idea for Explorer's Cabin was to force people to really engage with the great outdoors. So we deliberately, intentionally externalized the bathroom and toilet. So even in the middle of the night, you need to go outside to then go and use the bathroom. And it's inspired by sort of traditional yurt and sort of tent style glamping structures. And this is Musician's Cabin, designed to have a basic recording studio inside with a grand piano as well, with views out over the nice stream and woodland. And this is Architect's Cabin, which is one of the ones we're building at the moment. Got similar sort of references to the sauna, larger format shingles this time. Won't make that mistake again, because we're again building it ourselves. These are going to be charred, so torched before they're installed, and probably sealed with pine tar or oil over the top of the charring as well. And then this is Chef's Cabin, which has got this really awesome large green roof, edible green roof. So it's going to be planted with lots of seasonable fruiting plants and lettuces and that kind of thing. So yeah, lots of edible things to be harvested. Do you want to jump in here, take over from this bit?
So as Will mentioned, we're building Architect's Cabin at the moment. It's on the left, it's taking shape down in the woods, and then on the right is Yogi's Cabin, which also coming along well. For both of these cabins, we've used like timber construction in the frame. Yogi's is using some Scottish Douglas fir that we went and sourced ourselves from the Scottish borders. For the roof structure and the large overhanging eaves, this is Caledonia timber, where we got that Douglas fir from, and some of the processing in Melrose in Scotland on the left. On the right is Guy, our joiners, making the trusses for the pitched roof. And on the right is our workshop here, where we're making the 5 large, very large centre pivot swinging glazed windows and doors for Architect's Cabin. And they're going to hopefully be delivered down to site in the next couple of weeks for construction. And then in terms of the rest of the materials of the cabins, they're completely insulated with so Architects is insulated with hemp, 100% hemp insulation, grown in Jedburgh up in north of England, and then processed in Carlisle and delivered down to East Sussex. And then Yogi's Cabin will be using a Gutex wood fibre insulation, so there's no plastics within the insulation, and it's all kind of made in the UK and then supplied to the UK, of course. And then Will recently went to a local sawmill to source the cladding. I don't know, talk about that, Will?
Yeah. So we're working with a couple of local timber suppliers. This is literally the woods behind where we're building the cabin. So probably about a 15-20 minute walk through the woods across to powder mills. And this is them milling our larch cladding for us, which is really exciting. And we've also sourced some Douglas fir from another woodland, which is probably maybe a 5-minute drive up the road, which is then being processed at another slightly bigger sawmill. maybe about a 20-minute drive away as well. So, and that's going to be used for the floorboards and then some of the structural elements for some of the future cabins as well.
And you can, we keep on joking that we're not really building cabins. We're making a film about building cabins because we want to document the process in detail and the materials that we use. We want these buildings to be kind of a case study of how to build sensitively out of the proper materials. And so if you're interested in the construction, the design, and kind of the process of building, we're kind of, it's not quite monthly, kind of releasing these episodes from like the key aspects of the builds for each cabin. And you can also sign up to the newsletter to hear more, or follow along on the YouTube channel, and you can also just go to the Architects Holiday website for quite a lot more information about the project and the build and the progress and the process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I think we can just run over just very slightly, just because we had a couple of interesting questions that have just come in. One was going back to the shingles, asking whether they have single fixings, and also just asking more generally how the shingles are kind of performing. And we also had a question about the microclimate in wooded areas. Presumably, yeah, getting at I suppose the difference, individual kind of climate that you might have in a particular kind of wood. The two things there.
I can pick this up if you want. So the shingles, we used a single nail from a nail gun to fix those. So far, we haven't had any issues. So, I mean, how many years is that? It's been nearly 3 years.
And
the
image
just
at
over
the
3 years. So,
and the right-hand side image there is of it a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, it seems to be faring up fine just with the single fixing. I have to say, when we were installing them, we did have some split out, so we did waste a few. Obviously, if you had some, on or near knots or anything like that, they didn't survive. But the ones that went in without any splitting at the time have been, absolutely fine.
I suppose that the longevity of the shingles can be related to the microclimate, in that it is very sheltered down in the woods there, and it's not really exposed to extreme weather, and the overhanging roof also protects them quite a bit. I suppose one of the microclimate questions, well, it's quite a bit chillier down in the valley than up and out of it, which is quite nice for the sauna, because you do go through like the coldness and then you're into the warmth, and then in the summer it doesn't get too hot down there either.
The thing I've noticed from building down there, though, is actually, it's not so much the microclimate itself, but just the climate of building underneath trees and in a woodland is just the amount of bits that get everywhere and on stuff. You'll go down the next day having swept up the night before, and it's just, if it's been even remotely breezy, not even really windy, the amount of just twigs and leaves and all sorts of bits and pieces that have just fallen from the trees above you is quite a lot. So that's quite a challenge.
Great, thank you. Well, I think on that note, we're going to wrap things up and draw everything to a close. So thanks again to our guests, Will and Harry, for an absolutely marvellous presentation. It will be available up on YouTube in the next day or so. Thanks again to everybody that's attended. You can also watch our other various webinars on the TD UK YouTube channel. Thanks again, and I'll say goodbye and wish you all a very good afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.